Hey everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we will be continuing our series called Viridian. The creator of this what if is Silver, a mist anime lover or know as Kr Stark Tower. If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe and share the video with your friends. Now on to the what if. Chapter 12, Confusion and Lies. Izuku sighed as he took a sip of his sake. He was poring over a couple of cases he was working on as Viridian. Just because he got hurt didn't mean he was going to completely stop working. He just couldn't go out on patrol yet, was all. Viridian Chaos. Hey, Masa. I think I've got something. I'm going to shoot you an encrypted email with my findings. Fury. Ugh, just try to make the code solvable for me, would you? I don't want to have to go to Nizu again. Viridian Chaos. That was such an easy code, though. Fine. I'll send you the cheat sheet on a separate server. Fury. Thank you. Hey, I brought you some. Kigo stopped mid-sentence as he stared at the sake bottle. How did you buy that? You're 15. I'm physically 15. I'm actually around 44. Izuku smirked as he went for another drink. Your physical body would appreciate a working liver. Kigo snatched the bottle before Izuku could drink any more. The vigilante pouted. Ah, but I just started. Too bad. Wait till you're of age, like everyone else in the country. I mean, technically, time travel doesn't count. Kigo crossed his arms. Time, you're like the mother I never had. Izuku chuckled as he ran a hand through his hair. He grimaced at the greasy feel. I need a shower. Alright, come on, then. Back to my place. Huh. You heard me. You need a shower and you need your injuries looked at. Fine, fine. Izuku relented, grabbing his overnight bag. He was fairly used to staying over at Kigo's place, by this point. You know. Kigo tilted his head. You could totally move in with me? I mean, the teachers know that we're good friends, and no. Not only would that paint a really big target on you and your agency, but it also call up questions about my home life I'd rather not answer. Izuku rejected immediately. Besides, there's no guarantee I'd even be allowed to live with you, if they knew. I suppose that's true. What if I work out the paperwork on my end first? Kigo brightened again. Izuku groaned. Why couldn't he just drop it? Izuku liked being alone. I'm a grown adult of nearly half a century. I think I can live alone, yeah. I mean, legally. Kigo smirked as he held up the sake bottle. You can't even drink, so. I hate you. No you don't. He watched bemused as Izuku gathered his papers and stuffed it into his worn rescued duffel bag. Oh, yeah. There's a new video of Viridian circling the web. It's super popular, too. Oh. Izuku was only half paying attention. Yeah. Remember when you told that kid you were quirkless? Izuku dropped the book he'd picked up. What? Kigo handed him the phone. Turned out, that entire conversation had been recorded. And it went viral. The world knows you're quirkless. Viridian the quirkless vigilante. Kigo chuckled. How is this funny? Izuku stared at his friend in disbelief. I mean, now that they know, they'll underestimate you. Kigo finished, making Izuku pause. They'll underestimate you since nobody's really seen how well you can fight. They'll think you're just really good at staying hidden. You're the most elusive vigilante, not the most combative. The villains will get complacent. Maybe the League will even reach out and offer to you, believing you to be closer to them than a hero. Izuku mulled over his friend's words. If the League of Villains comes to me, then you can kill Shigaraki. Kigo nodded. But you'd damn well better have me on standby for backup if shit goes south, you hear me? Promise. Izuku grinned. Izuku sighed as he walked down the street. He was staying at Kigo's for the moment, but the hero had some other shit to do like work. Unfortunately, he was just as bad at adulting as Izuku was, so his fridge was practically empty, sans some 10-day-old chicken. Izuku was not going to touch that. So here he was grocery shopping with the money Kigo left him for this express purpose. He decided to swing by the mall for once, just to browse. He was looking over some interesting books on coding when a massive explosion shook the building. People started screaming, and Izuku quickly found a bathroom to change into his Viridian outfit. Call him paranoid, but he carried it everywhere with him specifically for circumstances like this. He climbed up into the air shaft, ignoring the way his healing injuries protested. He was fine. It was just some broken ribs and a concussion. And a partially disintegrated shoulder. Whatever, point being, he was fine, and he sure as hell wasn't going to sit by while the mall was attacked. He eyed the situation from the shaft he hid in. 3 visible villains. All male. Wait, he knew these guys. They had a criminal record. They were called the Crystal Thieves, because of the barrier quirk of the youngest brother. He could create a near-impenetrable barrier around a relatively small area. It wouldn't cover the whole mall, but it'd cover enough to trap a good number of people. Nobody in or out without his permission. Drawbacks included unable to move while active, and unable to lose concentration, lest the whole barrier come tumbling down. Second brother had a mild fire-type quirk. He could heat up his hands until they were as hot as molten lava, allowing him to burn through walls and safes with ease. Drawbacks include a rather long cooldown time, so he had to be careful of what he touched. Plus, only his hands and lower arms were fireproof, so if he accidentally hit himself, he could cause serious burns. The eldest brother would be the biggest challenge, though. He had a psychic-type quirk. A rather strong form of telekinesis that he had excellent control over. He could lift multiple objects or people at once, but his weight limit directly translated to his muscle mass. He could probably lift a few 100 pounds, though. Drawbacks include headaches and nosebleeds if he overuses his quirk, or surpasses the weight limit. Viridian needed to get at the youngest, but the oldest brother would protect him. With a quirk that could stop bullets or people mid-action, he was the ideal defender. The vigilante pulled out his phone, making sure it was on silent. Viridian Chaos, guys, we've got a situation. Fury, if you mean the mall, we already know. Are you going to join us? Viridian Chaos, about that. Shadow Slayer, you're already inside, aren't you? Knowing your luck, you were inside when the attack started. Straight face, Viridian Chaos. We have a winner. Laughing face, Dadzawa, be careful. It looks like the work of the Crystal Thieves. Viridian Chaos, oh, it is. I've got a visual on them right now. Here's the plan. I'll find a way to take out the youngest brother, the one making the barrier, and you guys come in first chance you get to back me up. Sound good? Fury, I really wish there was another way around this, aren't you still injured? Shadow Slayer, he is. Worst of it's his arm and some busted ribs, though. Please be careful, R.I. Viridian Chaos, I'll be as careful as I can be. I'll survive, at the very least. I'm too stubborn to die. Dadzawa, don't we know it? Your strength is your stealth, use it to your advantage. Viridian Chaos, I love that you tell me how to do my thing, when I was able to outrun you for over a year. Dadzawa. It was only 6 months or so. Viridian Chaos, you never caught me, so I'm still free. A year and counting. He slipped his phone back into his pocket. He had to be careful. They'd rounded up the hostages, and Coles for Brains was looking pretty heated. Viridian didn't like the way he kept looking at the women, or the way his hands twitched when he looked at the men. He didn't have much time to come up with a plan. He couldn't just drop down, because Psychic Boy would shut him down pretty fast. But if he couldn't see what he was doing? Viridian grinned as he silently scampered off to prepare for his plan. Kaminari Denki had been hanging out at the mall with his good friend, Jiro. After the attack on their class, he needed to go somewhere familiar to just forget about his near-death experience. UA was providing free counseling, mandatory, for all students, but that wouldn't start until school picked back up on Monday. Honestly, he was all for a 4-day weekend and all, but it wasn't worth getting attacked by villains. It'd been terrifying. And yet, here he was again, being attacked by villains. Seriously, why? The mall was supposed to be safe. He wanted to cry. He played the good hostage along with Jiro, hoping that they'd all make it out okay. In situations like this, it was bad to attack, right? Because innocent people could be hurt? He didn't even know their quirks. Where were the heroes and cops? Weren't they supposed to be here already? Hey, sorry to interrupt, but I'm a little lost. Does anyone know where the bookstore is? A man asked. He wore a Dark green almost black jumpsuit, shirt and pants. He couldn't tell, and had a mask that only revealed his green eyes. A utility belt hung on his thin frame, and he held himself with a casual air. Everyone turned to look at him, dumbfounded. "Who the fuck are you?" the man with white hands asked, glaring at the newcomer. "Oh, me? Nobody special." He shrugged. "Though do you think you could take down that barrier? It's making it a little difficult to leave, yeah no. I don't think you understand the situation, here." The one with purple hair glared. He'd been staying close to the third guy who'd been sitting still this whole time. "You're going to sit down with everyone else and be a good hostage. If you don't, we'll start killing people. You know, as much as I'd love to, I really can't. You see, I have this little rule about not working with villains. Trust me, you're not the first to try." He smirked as he threw something at the purple-haired man, but the little beads froze in midair. Hiraguchi Jikaru. Quirk, telepathy. You can control any objects or people and their placement in a three-dimensional plane up to your physical weight limit, roughly 429 pounds. Arrested alongside your brothers 2 years ago, broke out of prison 2 weeks ago. The man grinned. Hiraguchi Kiraku. Quirk, hot hands. Not the most creative name, but you were, what, 4.5? Your hands can expel heat up to about 1,600 F, making you essentially capable of melting just about anything. Only your hands are immune to heat. He turned towards the last brother. Hiraguchi Nanvarua. Quirk, crystal. Barrier, hence your group name, Crystal Thieves. You can create a barrier of a certain radius that keeps people in or out, as you choose. Selective. Powerful. Such a shame you chose villainy, you could have made a great hero. He sighed. Who the fuck? Kiraku took a step back, eyes wide. No, I know you. Jikaru's eyes narrowed as he glared at the man. You're that vigilante Viridian. A murmur swept through the crowd. Even Kaminari knew who Viridian was. He was the not quite a hero but still a hero vigilante that had taken the entire world by storm. First it was Japan, but after that video announcing his quirkless status. Isn't Viridian quirkless, though? Kiraku huffed. It's just a quirkless freak, we can beat him. He rushed towards the vigilante with a confident grin. No, you idiot. Jiraku tried to stop his brother, but the other man swung at the vigilante. Viridian easily sidestepped the punch with a sort of grace Kaminari had never seen before. He grabbed the man by the elbow and pivoted so quickly that he almost didn't see it. The larger man hit the floor with a resounding boom, hands causing the tile to sizzle and pop as it melted under the extreme heat. Viridian quickly jumped back and dashed at the psychic, who held up his hand and levitated the vigilante. He'd been caught. Kiraku got to his feet with a sore groan, glaring at the vigilante. I was going to tell you that Viridian has the record as Japan's most wanted vigilante. You can't get that title on stealth alone. He's got to have some kind of fighting prowess. He eyed the vigilante, who looked far too calm for his current situation. Though I must say I'm not impressed. Who said I was trying to defeat you? Viridian smirked. Boom. He whispered, and a moment later, a loud boom sounded right from the forgotten third brother's seat. The man jumped and toppled over with a startled yelp, allowing the barrier that kept heroes and police at bay to shatter. No. Jiraku glared, lunging for the vigilante. A gunshot stopped the villain's advance as the police rushed onto the scene. Kaminari recognized several heroes, including the number 3 hero, Hawks. The winged hero rushed right into the fight, taking out Kiraku with ease. Viridian, how do you keep getting yourself into these messes? Hawks asked, a teasing tone to his voice. I'm just that talented, birdie. Viridian replied with an easy smirk. Trouble just loves me. Yes, well, you're still hurt. I'll have you know, I've been treated at an actual hospital this time. So there. The vigilante seemed to stick out his tongue at the number 3 hero. Wow, that guy had guts. Viridian, how much extra paperwork did you cause me? A detective groaned as police apprehended the criminals. Come on, Masa. I only borrowed some supplies from a few stores. You stole to make a makeshift bomb. I had to distract them somehow. Kaminari stared. He'd planned that. All of that? You're giving us gray hairs. Hawks groaned. You know, I did originally come here to look at books. Plus I still need to pick up some groceries, so I'm going to head out, now. Viridian waved a hand over his shoulder as he walked away. Just email me your statement. The detective sighed. Will do, Masa. Izuku wasn't ready. He stood before the door of Class 1A. It was the first day back at school, and he was wondering how his classmates had taken everything. After all, the last time he'd seen them, he was being carted off to the hospital in critical condition after going toe-to-toe with a monster and villain that had incapacitated their sensei. Yeah, he was going to have a lot of bullshitting to do. With a deep breath, he opened the door to the classroom. At once, the students became silent as they looked at him. He supposed he was a bit of a sight for sore eyes. He sported a new scar on his left cheek that looked like he pissed off the wrong dude armed with a switchblade, and his arm was still in a sling from his shoulder, being partially disintegrated. Well, that, and he'd apparently stressed his shoulder with the mall incident, but that wasn't his fault. And he had to take that sling off to fight as Viridian. Yo. Midoriya. You're alive. Kirishima grinned as he jumped to his feet and ran over to meet him. I mean, I already told you I was alive via the chat, but... Izuku smiled at Kirishima. He was also glad to see Kaminari and Jiro were okay. He'd been worried because of the whole mall thing. Glad to see you're up and about, Kuro. You scared us. Tsu flashed him a grin. The fuck, Deku? Bakugo glared, getting to his feet. This is why you never should have become a hero. You can't do shit. Look at you. You're the only one of us that got hurt. He ignored Kirishima's attempt to calm him down and shrugged off Kaminari's hand. His eyes were set on Izuku, whose face had become cool and detached. That's because I fought the ringleader. Sensei got hurt, too. He pointed out. Yeah, but he took on dozens of villains alone. That's different. At least he's got a queer Bakugo. You will report to Nizu's office after school for detention. We do not tolerate bullying or quirk discrimination at UA. Do I make myself clear? Aizawa-sensei glared at the startled blonde as he came into the classroom. His mummified hand gently rested on Izuku's shoulder for the briefest of moments, and the greenette instantly recognized it as a form of comfort from the antisocial man. Thank you, sensei. Izuku quietly muttered to his teacher, who nodded gruffly. Now everyone get to your seats, we've got homeroom. Everyone scrambled to take their seats, and Izuku reluctantly sat behind the fuming blonde. Part of him was pleased he'd never, in any timeline, seen Bakugo get reprimanded for bullying or quirk discrimination before. It was satisfying and honestly soothed a part of Izuku that was still bitter over everything that the boy had said and done to him. He'd never forgotten when Bakugo told him to kill himself. Right. First off, everyone will attend mandatory counseling with Hound Dog every week. Your personalized schedules will be emailed to you tonight and effective immediately. This is not a setback. Do not feel discouraged at the nightmares or trauma. Every pro gets it. We've all got some form of PTSD, it comes with the job. Most just don't get it so soon. If you need anything, you can come to any staff member. His eyes lingered on Izuku for a moment before he continued. That aside, we've another matter to turn our gaze towards. The sports festival is coming, and you all need to prepare. There is no opting out. This is your best chance to catch the eye of the public, and the pros internships will take place after the festival, so this is your chance to shine. Plus Ultra, or you might just end up losing your spot to someone in general education. He warned. Oh yeah. Kaminari spoke up. I remember hearing about that. Sometimes kids from other courses can be moved into the hero course if they do well enough. Yeah, and if hero course kids suck enough, they can be moved out, too. Jiro reminded him. I'm not done, yet. Aizawa-sensei glared, activating his quirk for the briefest of moments, silencing the students instantly. Damn. That's a great intimidation tactic. Izuku idly noted. Due to this, your introductory course to heroics will be mostly self-study. If you want to use any school facilities after hours, or on the weekends, please come to me. Now I'm done. He promptly curled up in his sleeping bag and drifted off to sleep. The class, now sufficiently distracted with the prospect of the festival, forgot to interrogate Izuku about the USJ incident, which he was totally fine with. Before leaving, Aizawa placed a note on Izuku's desk. He curiously unfolded it. Meet me in the classroom during lunch. That doesn't mean don't eat. We need to talk. Well, shit. Izuku grimaced. He was going to have a tough time with this one. He was lost in thought, and was the first out of the room. He barely registered the group of students that crowded a classroom moments later. Classes seemed to simultaneously drag by, and rush past. Much to Izuku's dismay, it seemed some of his classmates had let slip his quirkless status to the rest of the student body. They likely didn't know it was something he'd rather keep secret. A majority of them, particularly the general education kids, were pissed. Nobody was stupid enough to really do anything drastic, but he knew those glares. Heard the whispers. He knew the notes would start soon, too. His injuries from USJ didn't help, either. They made him look weak to them, because only he, the quirkless heroics student, got hurt. But he ignored the jeers and glares with a practiced ease. It was something he'd had to deal with his entire life. Even when he went to trade school, or when he was an adult with a good job, it was a thing he'd learned to expect. He was smart enough the first go-around that the teachers didn't bully him, but his quirkless status kept him from receiving their protection. And as long as he'd done his work, his bosses hadn't really cared one way or the other. The only time someone had been reprimanded was when they'd hurt Izuku badly enough that it impeded his job performance. In all honesty, Aizawa was the first teacher he'd ever had the first person that had spoken up against someone to defend him, and it made him feel good. He knew Yamada would probably speak up, maybe Midnight. But he wasn't sure about any of the other teachers. Pro heroes or not, that didn't mean that they'd put a stop to it when he was quirkless. He'd known plenty of pros during the first run. How he'd decided to refer to the original timeline, that had promptly ignored him and his injuries or his need to be helped during villain attacks once they realized he didn't have a quirk. Izuku held little hope that many of these pros would be better. He really should have expected someone to shove him down those stairs as lunch started, but he thought that maybe these kids would wait a little longer, what with all the pros crawling around. He would have been fine, if his arm hadn't been in a sling. But the restricting fabric kept him from catching himself, so he ended up eating shit face first into the tile at the bottom of the stairs. He heard several people chuckling, but he couldn't tell who pushed him. The lingering students scattered fairly quickly, pretending not to see anything. With a sigh, Izuku pushed himself up and gathered his things. Real mature. He muttered under his breath as he awkwardly hoisted his bag up over his uninjured shoulder. Again. He was a little surprised that nobody bothered to try to destroy his stuff or steal his backpack while it was unguarded, but he supposed that they'd pushed their luck enough doing this much in a school filled with heroes. He made his way into the bathroom to assess the damage. He had a split lip, and a darkening bruise on the left side of his face. He must have cut his eyebrow on the edge of the stairs, because that was bleeding bit, too. Nothing broken, thank time. He washed off the dirt and fished out his portable first aid kit. As a vigilante and a quirkless guy, he'd learned early on to carry around any medical supplies he could. He checked his phone and huffed. He would be a little late to his meeting with Aizawa. Oh well. Sensei will have to learn to deal with it. He did tell me to eat, after all. I wonder if eating shit down the stairs counts. He idly wondered aloud as he made his way to the classroom. Midoriya, thank you for Komi. Aizawa stopped when he saw Izuku's face. What happened? Fell down the stairs. He answered swiftly. That's the oldest excuse in the book. Aizawa sent him a mild glare as Izuku closed the doors. Doesn't mean it's any less true. Did you fall down the stairs, or did someone make you fall? I mean, I'm pretty sure someone pushed me, but I didn't see who. Izuku shrugged. No sense in lying to him more than he had to. It doesn't matter anyways. Aizawa looked like he really wanted to pinch the bridge of his nose. It does matter. That's bullying. And it's nothing I'm not used to. Honestly, I'm surprised nobody's left me. Izuku's eyes fell upon his desk, where he saw something barely poking out. Aizawa must have left the room to grab himself food, because that had not been there when he left. Oh, never mind. Aizawa choked on his coffee when Izuku casually pulled out a red spider lily with a note attached that read, "Do us all a favor, quirkless." Izuku admired the neat flowing handwriting for a moment. TCH. They didn't even get the good kind of lily, they went with the cheap flower shop across town. He shook his head as he offhandedly went to toss it in the trash. God, I'm going to go gray. Aizawa muttered under his breath. That is not okay. Hand it here, and we'll figure out who sent it to you. They will be expelled. And blacklisted. Izuku blinked at him dumbly for a moment as he handed the Lillian note over to his teacher. What's with that look? I've gotten hundreds of these before, and no teacher has ever bothered to do anything. I actually think one of them provided the vase for a bouquet of them, once. I still have it. It's a pretty vase. Aizawa clenched his teeth and grumbled something that sounded like a long string of curse words under his breath. We aren't like your other teachers. This is not okay, Midoriya. Aizawa reminded him. You have earned your spot in UA, don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Sorry, Sensei, I'm just used to this. It's normal for me. Both in and out of school. People don't look at a quirkless person the same way they do everyone else. I'm lucky to be considered human half the time. Izuku decided to change the topic before it got too personal. So what did you want to talk to me about? Firstly, I want you to promise me that you'll bring any other notes, threats, and gifts to a staff member, preferably me if you get any more. And that you'll inform a staff member of any bullying. Izuku blinked. Sure, he knew Shouta hated bullying, but he hadn't expected him to be this up in arms about it. Sure. I promise. If it got the staff off his back, then he'd listen. I'm deceiving them enough already. I should just play along and let them know. Who knows? Maybe the bullying will get better before it gets worse. Well, either that or they'll retaliate outside of school grounds, but if they do that, then I can kick their butts. And sick Kigo on M. Izuku mentally grinned at that plan. Secondly, I know you withheld information when you were talking to Tsukachi about the USJ. Aizawa continued, and Izuku stiffened. You knew what that Noma was before anyone had even seen it. You mentioned it during that flashback during the battle trials. Shit. Izuku cursed under his breath. Listen to me, Midoriya. I need you to answer honestly. His voice became serious, and Izuku found himself mirroring his expression. Are you, in any way, shape or form, being held hostage or blackmailed by villains? They think I'm the spy, and they're hoping it's unwilling. For a moment, he considered playing on that route. It'd be a far easier thing to believe than the truth. No, Sensei. Izuku looked him dead in the eye. I'm not the traitor. I'm not your leak. Aizawa blinked in surprise for a moment. He probably hadn't expected Izuku to piece it together that fast. But you're right, I did already know about the Nomua, because I've encountered them before. That's why I knew how to kill it so quickly. Compared to the ones I've seen. It was thin and gangly, with a long whip-like tail for balance. The eyes were milky and sightless, and its elongated maw was lined with sharp teeth already stained red. Long arms ended in claws and its legs bent backwards, giving it more power to jump and sprint. It was short, in comparison to the rest of them only about 6 feet tall, but it seemed to be covered in a layer of hard scales. Unlike the others, who had an exposed brain from the top, this Noma's brain was only accessible from behind. And its most striking feature was that it was entirely white. Izuku was frozen in fear. The Noma was sniffing the air, and getting dangerously close to his hiding spot in the alleyway. He tried to calm his racing heart and quiet his breaths, but the fear made it nigh impossible. He was crouched behind an old, overturned dumpster. The snout of the Noma peeked around the edge of his hiding spot, and he felt his blood turn to ice. There was a ringing in his ears and his eyes blurred with tears. He could smell the Noma's putrid breath, and he was close enough now to see the bits of flesh and bone stuck between its razor-sharp teeth. It was close enough for him to reach out and touch, and he knew in that moment, he was going to die. Its sightless white eye seemed to bore into his soul. He would never see Hisashi, Namuri, or Shouta again. He'd never get the chance to say goodbye to Dabi or Tamaki. He'd never. Izuku caught sight of movement in the alleyway across from him. A man he'd never seen before stood there terrified. He was taking advantage of the Noma's interest in Izuku, and had made a break for it. The man shot off with such speed that Izuku knew it was a quirk, perhaps the only reason he'd made it this far. But the sound of his feet scraping on the gravel drew the attention of the white Noma, and it whipped around, away from Izuku. Izuku stayed frozen as he watched with horror as the white beast moved with unbelievable speed. It caught up to the speed-quirked man within seconds, and the man's anguished scream was cut off halfway, when his head was bitten in two. He let several tears run down his face and knew that that man's stupidity was the only reason he was even still alive. Compared to what I've seen, that Noma was incredibly tame. Izuku shuddered hard. He looked back up when had he looked away? Compared to what you've? Midoriya, where have you seen these Noma before? How many are there? He faltered for a moment. He'd already called him problem child. Was there a reason not to tell him? Why was he so scared? Because even if he knows, he's not your Shouta. His mind reminded him. And he never will be. There are things I need to explain to you. Izuku finally decided, a hard steel to his voice that made Izawa flinch back in surprise. To you, and Nizu, and probably Hisashi, too. And you can't tell me now, because I really don't want to explain it more than once. Please. Right now, I just need you to trust me. All right. Izawa relented. Is it okay if I explain after the sports festival? His teacher blinked in surprise. Is there any particular reason why? I need some time to figure out how I'm going to explain everything. It's, a bit of a wild tale, to say the least. No offense, sir, but I wouldn't believe myself if I hadn't lived through it. Izawa sighed, nearly whacking himself in the face with his cast when he went to pinch the bridge of his nose on reflex. Izuku held back a snort to help save his blushing teacher some dignity. All right. I'll set up the appointment with Nizu. Thank you, Izawa-sensei. Izuku smiled. Also, his tone became even more serious, if Izuku thought it was possible. What you did at USJ was stupid and irresponsible. You recklessly put your life in danger, and that is not how a hero acts. Izuku went to protest, but was cut off by a quirk-enhanced glare. However, Izawa continued. Your reckless behavior also saved my life. He then bowed to Izuku for a moment before straightening up. Thank you, Midoriya Izuku. Though I'd rather you hadn't put yourself in harm's way, under the circumstances, I can understand it. And thanks to you, I'm able to reprimand you for being an idiot. He then averted his gaze and flushed with embarrassment. I'm sorry for taking up your lunch period like this. Izuku stared for a moment before he felt a giant grin spread on his face. He couldn't remember the last time he'd smiled so brightly. I'm just glad you're okay, sensei. He then, against his better judgment, hugged Izawa. The man stiffened for a moment before ultimately allowing it and reciprocating as much as he could. You just wanted to make sure I was safe. Nothing wrong with that. Izuku then pulled away. I'm going to go get ready for class. Please tell me you ate something other than the staircase. God damn it, problem child. Izuku laughed. Izawa Shouta was a lot of things right now. He was in pain, he was tired, he was annoyed, but most of all, he was concerned for Midoriya Izuku, someone he'd recently taken to calling problem child. And his problem child was a Rubik's Cube of mysteries. During the USJ incident, as the staff had taken to calling it, he'd thought the name Noma sounded familiar, but in the chaos of everything, he hadn't been able to place it. He remembered watching in transfixed horror as Midoriya had fought against the monster, and he was sure he'd soon witness his student's untimely death. He'd tried to stagger to his feet, but his broken body just would not listen to him. And then Midoriya had somehow managed to kill it. Shouta had no idea how the kid had been able to move fast enough to get behind it. He'd had no clue how his student had even survived being thrown into the nearby fountain, but he was glad he managed it. Oh, and how Shouta wanted to reprimand the brat for purposefully taunting the villain, Shigaraki, the same Shigaraki Tamura that Viridian was after. The utter relief he'd felt upon realizing that backup had arrived nearly had him passing out. He'd vaguely recognized his husband's voice, and turned to glare at him for keeping him awake. At the time, he hadn't fully registered his concussion, and just wanted to sleep. Later, at the hospital, Hawks of all people burst in the door. Shouta had been completely floored, seeing the normally laid-back and aloof hero so frantic. He was genuinely concerned for this kid in his class that he should have no way of knowing. Shouta didn't fully buy the villain incident. Sure. Tsukachi didn't detect a lie, but Shouta had made sure to thoroughly check the background of all of his students. Midoriya had no recent hospital visits or trauma reports, a requirement after being attacked by any villain. So they were either lying, or as close as they could get without setting off Tsukachi's lie detector, or Hawks had failed to follow protocol for some reason. But Shouta's research brought up something else. Midoriya hadn't been to a hospital since he was 4. Since he was pronounced quirkless. That set off several alarm bells for the hero, who quickly shared his findings with Nizu and Tsukachi, the latter so he could look into things on his end. Maybe the kid was abused? But he'd told Tsukachi he was safe at home. Was home perhaps with someone else? The streets. God, he hoped not. It wasn't until after he'd been released from the hospital that Shouta recalled where he'd heard the name Noma before during Midoriya's flashback during All Might's first class. He'd mentioned hearing Nomu around them, which meant that he'd encountered them before. Which also meant that there was more than one. He'd taken this information to Nizu immediately, and the principal had confessed his suspicions of Midoriya being their leak. The thought made Shouta simultaneously angry and heartbroken. He'd been growing attached to this brat, whether he wanted to admit it or not. The fact that he was likely a traitor. Ah, but hold on, Aizawa. Nizu had said, stopping him from leaving. There's more to my theory. Oh. A ray of hope. I think that, if he is the traitor, he's being held captive by this league of villains. I'm a fair judge of character, and I don't think he wants to hurt any of us. I truly believe that if he is the traitor, it's against his will. After Nizu had told him that, he felt his heart lighten a bit, even if the thought of Midoriya in the hands of villains made him cringe. That was why he asked him to meet him during his lunch break. Asking him to stay after school would raise suspicions, if their hunch was correct. And damn, had that conversation taken a lot of energy from Shouta. By the end of it, he felt as emotionally drained and battered as his body. Which was saying something considering he was currently living on Skull Crusher coffee mixed with energy drinks and caffeine powder. If Recovery Girl found out, he'd be skinned. He re-entered the staff room to find only Hisashi and Nemuri there. Thank God. Shao? Are you okay? You look like shit. Hisashi's eyes shone in concern. God, I want to kill somebody, but I don't have the energy to do it. He moaned, burying his face in his husband's shoulder. Okay, what's up? Hisashi's tone was uncharacteristically serious. Midoriya's getting bullied. Badly. Kid walked into our meeting with a beat-up face because someone shoved him down the stairs. What? Nemuri and Hisashi cried at the same time. And don't get me started on the note. Shouta growled just thinking about how casually Midoriya had tried to throw away that lily. Someone left an actual death threat in his desk, and the kid was so used to it that his first reaction was to criticize where they got their supplies from before attempting to throw it away. Shouta's voice was rising, now, but he didn't really care. He pulled away from Hisashi as he angrily paced, instead. And when I actually intervened and told him that the person responsible would be expelled, he looked at me like I'd grown a second head before explaining that his previous teachers had ignored or encouraged such behavior. Encouraged. If his hands weren't cast, Shouta would be pulling at his hair, right now. He says it's normal for him. That he's lucky for people to look at him as a human being. He stopped, suddenly out of breath and even more exhausted than before. Hisashi cautiously approached him. It wasn't often that Shouta lost his cool, but when he did, it was typically explosive. Nemuri stared at him with wide eyes, having only seen him like this a handful of times. It's all right, Shao. We'll bring it up at the teachers' meeting today, and figure out who sent it. He helped Shouta sit back down on the couch. We'll help the little listener. Someone's attached. Nemuri smirked. Shouta would have normally denied it, but that would require energy he no longer had. So he opted for glaring at his friend instead. You look beyond exhausted, Shao. Hisashi helped him climb into his yellow sleeping bag. Take a nap. I'll wake you later. He sent his husband a mild glare, but he was never one to pass up a nap. And he must have really looked bad if he was actually encouraging Shouta's shitty sleeping habits for once. He half-heartedly muttered some sort of semblance of good night before he slipped into his nightmares again. Nizu was many things. He was a creature of unknown genetic makeup. He was incredibly intelligent, more so than most humans. He was the maker of a million plans. But lately, he'd found himself encountering something entirely new to him. Nizu was confused. And it all came back to one Midoriya Izuku, first quirkless student of UA. The kid was the biggest and most convoluted puzzle Nizu had ever had the pleasure of coming across. The more he tried to figure out about the boy, the more mismatched pieces he found. It was like trying to solve a two-sided puzzle, but only half the pieces were colored in. And just when he thought he'd finally solved it, the image was wrong, and he realized it was a three-sided puzzle. Nizu wasn't used to headaches, either. He sat down in his chair in the staff meeting room. Aizawa had wanted to report a case of severe bullying in the school, and such cases were taken with the utmost seriousness. "All right, Aizawa. What's the situation?" Power Loader asked, concern lacing his voice. Bullying wasn't a common occurrence in UA at all, mostly because of how harshly they punished such actions. That, and many weren't stupid enough to carry out such actions in a hero school. Midoriya Izuku. Aizawa started, and Nizu fought the urge to smash his skull into the table. "As you know, he's quirkless." Aizawa continued, and several of the staff nodded grimly, seeing where this was going. "It appears that the rest of the school has found out, too. I had a meeting with the kid at lunch today, and he walked into the classroom with half his face black and blue. Someone pushed him down the stairs, but he claimed he never saw who it was. He came and saw me after school." Recovery girl spoke up. "I have some pictures of the damage done." She passed around some photos of the student's bruised face. "Nizu would definitely be going over the security footage tonight." "There's more," Aizawa continued, and the staff looked over in disbelief. "It gets worse than shoving the kid down the stairs." Cementos choked out. For a moment, Aizawa's eyes flashed red with anger, and Nizu knew he wasn't going to like this. He found this in his desk. He's apparently so used to it, that he just throws them away. He says this is the first one he's found at UA. He then proceeded to pull out a red spider lily. Several of the staff gasped in shock. There was also this note. "If you recognize the handwriting, please tell me." If Nizu was angry before, he was furious, now. As confusing as Midoriya was, he was still a person who interested him. It was rare for Nizu to find people that could hold intellectual conversations with him in the way Midoriya could, and the fact that Nizu couldn't figure him out only made him that much more intriguing. To put it simply, Midoriya was Nizu's puzzle. And nobody hurt what belonged to Nizu. I've gone ahead and had him promise to tell one of us if something occurs again. He's told me that his previous school encouraged the bullying, and even mentioned a teacher providing a vase for the lilies. We need to show him that teachers can be trusted. Oh, boy. Vlad rubbed his temples. On another note, Aizawa looked at Nizu, who nodded. "You asked him, then?" "He said he wasn't our leak. He told me he knew what the Noma were because he's encountered them before. He had another brief flashback that leads me to believe that he's telling the truth. So we're back to square one." Nizu sighed. "Wait, you mean you thought the little listener was the traitor?" "We thought he might be an unwilling accomplice of the villains, possibly blackmailed or held captive." Aizawa sighed. "But it appears that my hunch was wrong." Nizu chimed in, and several staff members blinked at him in shock. He's truly an interesting puzzle. I've never had someone quite as perplexing as him before. His mind flashed to the rings he'd handed back to the child. They were undoubtedly the wedding bands of Yamada Hisashi and Aizawa Shouta, but he knew for a fact that both teachers were wearing said rings around their necks right now. The custom bands were nearly impossible to replicate by professional means, let alone for a child who's never seen them before. The engravings inside the bands were on point, too. This only made him even more confused. He didn't like the feeling. "I don't believe that Midoriya Izuku is a danger to us or UA," Nizu finally said, and several staff members relaxed. "If anything, I think he's trying to help us somehow. I went back over the footage from the USJ cameras, and managed to salvage some of the audio. From what I've gathered, Midoriya did everything in his power to protect the other students and his teachers. The villain Shigaraki Tomura did not seem to recognize Midoriya at all, even though Midoriya seemed to recognize him on sight. I'm getting confused." Midnight sighed. Several other staff members muttered to their neighbors as well. In short, I believe Midoriya is not a danger to us or the school. If anything, he's trying to help us. He's someone we need to protect. Nizu said, earning nods from his staff. The principal decided that it was time for tea, and quickly made himself a pot. He sat back down in his chair, as he pulled out a bottle of rum. He then added rum, a bit of honey, and a spritz of lemon to his cup before pouring the tea over top. He took a nice long sip, and relaxed into his chair. Principal Nizu. Toshinori asked, eyeing the alcohol warily. Are you okay? The room had gone quiet. Midoriya Izuku is quite confusing, Nizu started, and I find rum helps rid me of headaches. The staff stared. You're confused? Higuri choked. Yes. Yes I am. And if he smiled behind his teacup as the staff collectively lost it, well, at least he was entertained, now. He could think about Midoriya tomorrow. Chapter 13, Stirring the Pot. Tsukashi Naomasa was tired and overworked. It wasn't a pretty combo, but it was something he was used to. And the USJ case was a top priority right now. It had a ton of media attention and a lot of angry parents waiting behind the proverbial red tape. He shuddered to think of how Eraserhead was going to deal with that. He supposed his friend's main saving grace was the fact that he'd been grievously injured protecting said children, so the parents would hopefully go easy on the teacher, even if they didn't go easy on the school itself. So, Naomasa had done the logical thing. He'd called in Viridian to help. The man had become their ace in the hole. He was a literal godsend. Not only was his information reliable, accurate, and extensive, but the man himself was excellent at problem solving and a knack for seeing the details that the heroes and police had missed. If Viridian ever decided to become a detective instead of a hero, Naomasa would honestly hand in his badge. This man was far more capable. He was privately glad the vigilante wanted to be a hero instead. He liked his job. Eraserhead showed up first. Hey, how are you holding up? He asked the hero. The man was still practically a mummy, and he idly wondered if he was even supposed to be out of bed. He and Viridian have a lot in common. Actually, rather well. Eraser admitted. I expected a lot of angry parents, but there were really only one or two. Some even sent me get well soon and thank you cards. Hagakure's parents sent me flowers. Huh. That's a nice surprise. Naomasa wasn't expecting that. Another student's parents came to thank me in person. Apparently word got out to the parents that I'd nearly died while trying to protect their kids, so that's probably got a lot to do with it. Though I didn't hear anything from Midoriya's parents. His brows furrowed. You're worried about him, aren't you? He lacks a medical record after he was diagnosed quirkless, and he's completely okay with being bullied. He's underweight, and has more scars than most pros. He fights like it's second nature, and doesn't hesitate to kill when defending his classmates. What am I supposed to think? His parents never even came while he was in the hospital despite us trying to notify them, and the number we had on file turned out to be the private number of pro hero Hawks. When you put it that way. Naomasa had to admit it was worrying. A student with prior trauma that he refused to elaborate on. He had some sort of connection to the Noma, thus the League, but was not the alleged traitor. He nearly killed himself trying to protect his classmates and teacher, so they could safely assume he was on their side, but the amount of secrets this kid kept was worrying. It sounded like abuse or abandonment. Maybe he's living on the streets. Abandoned by his parents when he was diagnosed quirkless? It's happened before. I know. Eraserhead rubbed his face with his cast. It would certainly explain a lot. I still feel like we're missing something, though. A lot of somethings. If he was homeless, then why would Hawks say that he occasionally stays at Midoriya's place? I doubt the number 3 hero would condone a child living on the streets. Right. I keep forgetting about Hawks. Naomasa felt a headache flaring up. We'll talk a bit more about this later. Maybe Viridian can shed some insight. Right. Eraserhead glanced at the clock. I'll go get him. He should be here soon. Viridian stretched his arms over his head as he walked down the street. It wasn't often that he was out and about in daytime hours, but Tsukachi had asked him to come in for whatever reason, so he figured there was no harm. It was Saturday, after all, so no school. Kigo was kicking it back at the camper, trying to help Izuku brainstorm ways to explain his unique situation to the UA staff, because he figured that after he explained himself to Nizu, Shouta, and Hisashi, he'd probably end up having to explain himself to the rest of the staff as well. He'd had to laugh when Kigo had mentioned a girl he knew that had a memory viewing quirk. They'd keep that as their last desperate option, because Izuku was neither keen on reliving everything, nor did he want to traumatize his teachers. He wanted them to believe him, not give them nightmares. Some guy on the street stopped to stare at him with an odd expression. "You're the shadow hero, Viridian," he cried out, and said Vigilante stopped in shock. I am sorry, what? Did someone seriously just recognize him? He'd never get used to that. Yeah, he's right. That's Viridian. Can I have your autograph? How do you do it quirkless? You're a true inspiration to all of us who don't have combative quirks. Hey, fucking loser. You're just a wannabe. Okay, that last one was much more familiar than everything else. I feel like I should clarify something. Viridian scratched the back of his head awkwardly. I'm technically not a licensed hero. I just help out whenever the police need me. I'm technically a vigilante. The crowd was starting to make him uncomfortable. But you have to have a quirk to be a vigilante, a woman said, walking up towards him. She was very beautiful, and if Izuku swung that way, he might even be flustered. And you, sir, have no quirk. So you aren't a vigilante. That means you're a hero. She leaned in further, showing off some rather impressive assets. It was only then that he realized that she held a recording device. Nakamura Nero with the MC News. Mind giving me a statement? He didn't know how to respond. This kind of situation was not his forte at all. Sorry, I really don't have the time. There you are, Viridian. You're late. Officer Sansa to the rescue. Viridian felt like crying in relief. He'd rather face a black Noma blindfolded than a reporter. He quickly jumped backwards, flipping so his feet hit the side of the building behind him, and sprung over the crowd that had gathered. He then wasted no time in sprinting the rest of the way to the station, Sansa watching in amusement the whole time. Little bastard. 'Bout time you got here. Eraserhead raised an eyebrow as Viridian caught his breath. I hate crowds. I don't know how limelight heroes do it. He ignored the way the underground hero chuckled at his expense, instead opting to glare. He fished out his phone when it buzzed. Shadow Slayer, dude. You're on the news. Did you really have to springboard off the building? Viridian Chaos, yes. Yes I did. You know I hate crowds. Shadow Slayer, and yet you're typically so good with people. Viridian Chaos, don't lie, it's unbecoming. We both know my people skills are shit. He locked his phone and dropped it back in his pocket. Masa and Eraser had made him upgrade to a hero-grade smartphone, which he'd promptly disassembled and reassembled without tracers. So, know why Masa wants to see me? We'll explain in the office. I'm not in trouble, am I? Viridian tilted his head. Eraserhead snorted. As if we could actually catch you if you were. I mean, it didn't work the first time. He smirked. You really have no idea, do you? Shouta looked incredibly amused. No idea about what? Now he was lost. What the hell was Shouta getting it? You are one of the most powerful people in Japan, Viridian. Said Vigilante choked. He would have laughed but he knew that Shouta wouldn't joke about something like that. What? Me? How? That's illogical. He spluttered, flustered. Eraserhead gave him an amused smirk. You are so elusive that we had to make a partnership with you in order to actually speak to you face to face. You're listed in our database as the number 3 vigilante in the world. Okay, that was news. And number 1 in Japan. The fact that you're quirkless now globally known means that you're damn near legally untouchable, and everyone knows it. You're the first unlicensed legal hero. The police made this deal on your terms, Viridian. If we wanted to catch you, you would just slip away again. And if we somehow did manage to catch you, the public would riot until you were freed. People are already starting campaigns to get you a license. He looked a shell-shocked Viridian in the eye. You really didn't know? Kigo would be rolling on the ground right now. I don't exactly Google myself, you know. He hadn't searched up his vigilante name in months. He'd been a little busy preparing for UA and the like. Well, with your extensive information network, I thought you would have kept tabs on how the public saw you. As if I care how the public sees me. He shuddered as he remembered the crowd. Though maybe I should. Glad you could make it. Tsukachi grinned, beckoning them into the room. Take a seat. The two sat down. So, new case. Viridian ventured, now glad to be back on a familiar topic. Sort of, it's new to you. The USJ incident. Both hero and vigilante stiffened. When you first proposed our partnership, Viridian, you asked us to keep a lookout for Shigaraki Tamura. Well, we found him. Tsukachi slapped a file down on the desk before the vigilante, who curiously picked it up. It was the file on USJ alongside photos and statements including his own. He headed the attack on UA, and since you're after him, I figured you'd like to be brought onto the case. I'd very much like that. Viridian grinned. So tell me, Masa. He laced his fingers together under his chin as he leaned forward. What VE you got on Shiggy? It was 3 hours later that Viridian decided he hated police investigations. They were tedious and time-consuming. Sure, he'd worked on plenty of cases with Masa and Shouta before, but this was a case his civilian persona was involved in. Maybe it's time for a shift in subjects. Eraserhead finally said, and Viridian sighed in relief. Thank you. We wanted your opinion on another case. Tsukachi handed him another envelope. It's not an official case, though. And we intend to keep it that way. It's about the well-being of a student. The moment Viridian opened the file he really wished he hadn't. His own photo smiled back at him. Motherfucker. He's a student of mine. Midoriya Izuku. And until recently, we thought he might have been the UA traitor. Eraserhead explained. Viridian hid his unease well. All right. So what am I investigating? I'm asking this as a favor. Eraser took a deep breath. A favor to a friend. Ah, shit. He's pulling the friend card. I'm so fucking screwed. Viridian spent the next half hour listening to Tsukachi and Shouta list out every little thing about his civilian persona that he'd tried to hide. The scars, the lack of medical files, damn it, he knew he'd forgotten something, trauma, flashbacks, knowledge of the Nomu, suspicions of kidnappings or living on the streets. And for once, he really didn't know what to do. He had all the answers they were looking for, and in his current state of semi-panic, he couldn't think clearly enough to look at the situation objectively. All he could think about was the pair of rings that sat under his vigilante uniform. The main connection between Midoriya Izuku and Viridian. He looked over the file and winced. Internally, they'd gathered more than he thought they would. You said Midoriya was going to give you information after the sports festival, right? He looked at Shouta. Right. That's what he promised me, at least. But I'm worried. If his home life is crap or he's living on the streets, then he might not survive until the sports festival. Viridian was internally offended. I can survive on the streets just fine, thank you. An idea suddenly flickered into his head. I'll keep an eye on him, for you. He offered, and the two men turned to him with a raised eyebrow. You're going to stalk him. Just until the sports festival. He mentally willed them to accept his proposal. I'm damn good at staying under the radar, you know that. I'll keep him out of trouble until the sports festival rolls around. It's just a couple of weeks, it'll be fine. This kid's a trouble magnet if I've ever seen one. Eraserhead groaned. I have half a mind to join you. Shit. No. Nope. No. What, you don't trust me? Besides, that'll cut into your day job. And your weekend sleep, which we all know you can't function without. I can function without. God knows I had to with you running around all last year. He sent Viridian a glare, which he promptly ignored. No, I think Viridian's right. Let him trail the kid for the next 2 weeks, maybe he can pick up on some things we've missed. Tsukachi spoke up, and Viridian felt like he could kiss the man in gratitude as Eraserhead hesitantly nodded along. Time, I love you, Masa. You're officially my best friend. Fine. Eraserhead sighed. Just, please keep in contact. Will do. Though I can't follow him past U.AS gates. I suppose that'll be safe enough. I'll talk to Nizu about granting you a pass later, if that's what you want. Eraser nearly bashed his nose with his cast in an attempt to pinch the bridge, and this time, Viridian didn't feel like holding back his laughter. He earned a glare for his efforts. I'd like to see you move around with these stupid things on. But that'd require a hospital visit, and we all know that's not gonna happen anytime soon. We can hope it doesn't need to happen anytime soon. Tsukachi chimed in with a glare. Which reminds me, Viridian. Since Eraserhead's out of commission right now, I was hoping you could take over his patrol schedule. The vigilante blinked. Is your agency okay with that? I'm not licensed. 1. I'm an independent hero, I don't have an agency. 2. We're making an exception this time. Tsukachi smirked. Smile. He smiled on reflex as a flash blinded him for a brief moment. Wah. He heard the sound of a portable printer. Here you are. Your provisional hero license. Viridian stared at the small strip of plastic in shock. This is a sick joke, you know that. It's not a joke. Eraserhead stated. The public rioted that you hadn't been licensed, and the Hero Committee looked over your numbers. They looked at how many criminals you've managed to catch vs collateral damage and decided to grant you a provisional license. You'll have another review in a few months, and they'll decide from there if you've earned the right to take the exam for the actual license. Well, you had a couple of different heroes vouch for you, too. Tsukachi said. The specifics on who were kept under wraps, but there are rumors that Hawks and even All Might recommended you. All Might. Viridian blinked. I thought he disliked the quirkless. He looked at the ID card again. So, this is real? He felt his eyes moisten. Sure is. Tsukachi grinned. Congratulations, Viridian. You're a legal hero, now. The first quirkless hero the world's seen. He quickly swiped the tears away, but they wouldn't stop. The two men shared a surprised look as his shoulders shook. You okay? Eraserhead asked. I never thought I'd ever. All my life people looked at me like I wasn't even human. They laughed at my dream of being a hero and I never thought I'd ever have a shot at it. And now, I have a license. It is just provisional, so be careful. You can engage as you see fit, but try to keep casualties and collateral to a minimum. Any little thing can hurt your chances at the exam. Eraser reminded him. I know. But he looked at the card, which had a picture of his vigilante persona smiling back, only his eyes visible. The name Viridian was neatly printed at the top beside the word hero. Thank you. Cult of Viridian chat Gaye Fanime Boi is online Gaye Fanime Boi, ye. Dragonina dress. Are you okay? Moldy Brochkli, ye demonic gay microwave, oh, god no not again. Gaye Fanime Boi, ye Noiskerdili, not another ye war. Barbie I saw whore, better than Yeet vs Yote war. And definitely better than that Teletubbies sticker spam. Shudders Moldy Brochkli, ye the cake I's a lie, don't remind me, I'm still traumatized. Gaye Fanime Boi. Ye Noiskerdili, can someone please just explain what's going on? Moldy Brochkli, it's amazing. Gaye Fanime Boi, incredible. Moldy Brochkli, a miracle. Gaye Fanime Boi, a blessing I've been praying for. Dragonina dress, still not an explanation, guys. Moldy Brochkli, Viridian got a hero license. He's legal now. Laughing face. Gaye Fanime Boi, he's the world's first quirkless hero. It's amazing. Barbie I saw whore, that explains your excitement. Nods Noiskerdili, well, they are the two biggest Viridian fans on the server. Gaye Fanime Boi, and now. Maybe I can actually go meet him someday at a panel or something at HeroCon and thank him for saving my life. Laughing face. I can't wait. I'm so excited Fio flake falfle white Fio wist J Noiskerdili. I'm going to bed. Night. Manly Riot, GB. Go to bed. Gaye Fanime Boi, EEP. Sorry, brother Manly Riot, don't apologize. Go to bed. Gaye Fanime Boi has logged out. Chapter 14, Quirkless Consequences. Nizu's tail flicked as he called the meeting to order. The teachers sat around the table with grim faces. Has anyone found the sender of the note? He asked. I've analyzed the handwriting, and I'm about 80% sure it's Hanatabi from General Education 2E. Cementos stated with a sour look. Then keep a very close eye on him. If we can catch him in the act, even better. I'll bring in Tsukashi to ascertain his statement. Nizu said. He glanced around the room again. It'd been a full week since Midoriya had been given the note and Lily, and he hadn't reported any other instances. Either he wasn't reporting them, or their students were being cautious. Nizu didn't like either option. The student responsible for shoving Midoriya down the stairs had been dealt with swiftly and without mercy. His deliberate action had been caught on one of Nizu's many school cameras. But the flower incident had not, which bothered him. Hanatabi would make sense. The boy had a weak teleportation quirk. He could teleport any inanimate object the size of a book or smaller to anywhere within a 10-foot radius of himself. The better he knew the object he was transferring, or the destination, the easier it was to do. He didn't even need physical contact with the object. He could have easily teleported the flower from within his school bag to Midoriya's desk as he walked past the classroom. Privately, Nizu thought the child wasted his quirk. So many applications, and yet no drive. He'd claimed to want to be a hero when he started, but he never applied himself. He could have learned the inner workings of robots and teleported pieces or screws away, compromising the integrity of the structure. This kid could have brought down their zero-pointer with little more than a wrist movement. But he refused to think outside the box. Quite the opposite of Midoriya, who could come up with creative solutions to many problems without the use of a quirk. Nizu was very disappointed. Hanatabi had become bitter over the break about not being able to transfer to heroics. But Nizu refused to transfer someone who didn't show the proper drive or ingenuity. He'd only get himself and others killed. Still, the principal had hoped he hadn't gone far enough to teleport the flower and note to Midoriya's desk. Nizu had asked the staff to keep a closer eye on Midoriya. All things considered, the boy may not notice half the bullying. It'd become so normal for him over his short life that certain actions, words, and gestures may not come across as threatening or harmful to him. The way Aizawa described his casual reaction to the lily only cemented this theory. And Midoriya? Have any of you noticed any unsettling interactions or negative treatment from his peers? Nizu asked. Kids glare at him in the hallways. Some of them don't even bother to hide it unless a teacher's around. Aizawa grunted. Midoriya's taken to eating his lunches by the window in the east corner of the lunchroom. I don't know if he consciously recognizes it, but the window opens easily and there's a sturdy tree right outside. It's a quick, easy escape route should he feel cornered. I fear he's falling back into what look to be some old habits, too. I've caught him hiding school supplies around the campus. I don't know if it's because someone's destroying his things, or if it's because he expects them to. He didn't have his textbook the other day. Cementos recalled. I didn't call him out on it, and he didn't look overly bothered by it. Most kids would be somewhat embarrassed. It's possible that someone stole or destroyed it. He looked surprised when I gave him another copy and offered to go over the material with him again. The little listener probably hasn't had any teachers that bothered to care before. Present Mike grimaced. He's gotten a little more skittish lately, have you noticed? And a bit more spacey, too. The meeting continued for a little bit, before they started switching to more normal topics like school funds and lesson plans. Ectoplasm lifted his head. Hold on, we've got a visitor. He stood up and opened the door. Sorry. I didn't know there was a meeting. Midoriya shuffled a bit in place, obviously uncomfortable. No worries, little listener. Present Mike grinned. What's up? Need some help with the homework? And no, I just. His gaze flickered to Aizawa for a moment. Did you get another note? His homeroom teacher asked, and the kid nodded. Yeah. He pulled out an envelope and a small box. They were separate. The note was in my locker and the box was slipped into my bag. Has anyone done anything to your school supplies? Cementos asked suddenly. I mean, I found my literature textbook in the fountain the other day. Sorry I couldn't bring it to school today. I'm still drying it out. I'll return the copy you let me borrow when I can. Don't worry about it, Midoriya. We've got plenty of copies. You don't need to worry about the damaged one. And you can keep the one I gave you. He quickly reassured. I thought you said you'd report this stuff to me. Aizawa sighed. His bandages were quickly dwindling down and he no longer looked like a mummy. At the very least, his fingers were individually wrapped and he could grab things again. Huh? What, you mean the textbook? Midoriya looked honestly confused, and Nizu internally sighed as he realized that he really hadn't considered that wrong. Midoriya, that's still considered bullying. I don't care if it's after school hours or off campus. Someone tried to sabotage your education and make you feel unsafe. Aizawa explained. Oh. He went a little red. So my school supplies going missing. The teachers all internally groaned. That, too. Mike chimed in. It's not your fault, listener. That's why we're here to help you. The kid blinked for a moment, as if he'd forgotten that detail. Now, what's this about notes? Nizu brought the conversation back on track. The boy hesitated before handing it over to the principal, who happened to be sitting closer to the child than his homeroom teacher. He opened the letter first. It was typed, he noted. I have no idea how a quirkless waste of space like you managed to get into UA at all, let alone the hero course, but I'm sure you had to suck a lot of dick to get it. Tell me, little whore, was it worth it? It's the only thing you're good for, right? Watch your back, because my friends and I are going to get a lot of use out of you. If you don't decide to do everyone a favor and keel over first, that is. U.A.S. building is more than tall enough. You know the staircase by the gym? It's always unlocked. It'll lead you right up to the rooftop. Go ahead if you're brave enough. Freak. Midoriya, I need you to let a staff member know immediately if you get anything else. Okay. He looked at the boy. This is a very serious threat. I know. It's why I looked for someone after I realized the staff room was empty. At least the boy knew that much. He wasn't so used to the treatment that he didn't recognize the danger this implied he was in. He'd order the staff to keep a closer eye on the boy, too. He did not want to risk the sender following through on this threat. Nizu thought for a moment. I've got something for you, too. He hopped down for a moment before he pulled something out of his bag. It was a small tie clip. Sir. An emergency button. Nizu grinned. If you ever need us, and a staff member isn't around, press and slide the little button hidden here. It'll send out your location and an SOS to the staff. The teachers shifted uncomfortably. They didn't know what was in the letter yet, but they recognized that it must have been bad if Nizu was giving a student something like this. Thank you, sir. Midoriya smiled before his phone pinged. He glanced at it with a wince. Crap. I'm late. Kigo's gonna kill me. If you have something you need to go do, you're free to go. Nizu smiled, and the kid grinned back. Thank you. He closed the door softly behind him, and Nizu let his smile drop. All right, Nizu. What the hell was in that letter? You don't just hand out SOS beacons to students because of bullies. Snipe spoke up. A suicide baiting and a rape threat. Nizu stated as he passed the letter around. Aizawa, in particular, looked furious. Needless to say, we should make sure he isn't ever somewhere alone on campus. We can't risk that whoever threatened him has their ways of staying unnoticed. And what's in the box? Hound Dog asked after a moment. Let's find out. Nizu cautiously opened the lid, noting that the seal had not been broken. Midoriya hadn't opened it, but the small little card attached to the bow read, for the quirkless freak. The boy had obviously realized it wasn't a nice gift. At first glance, it was a very pretty bracelet with red and black beads. Nizu almost picked it up to inspect it closer, when his nose picked up on something. He carefully closed the lid and put it in a sealed bag. If he were human, he'd probably be rather pale. As it was, his fur was standing on end. Ectoplasm, make a clone and make sure Midoriya makes it to Hawks safely. The man nodded and did so. Without question. Aizawa, I want you to send this to Tsukachi. Tell him to open a case. A case? Toshinori asked, coughing up a bit of blood. I can't identify which one it is, but that bracelet is definitely poisoned. The room collectively flinched. You mean someone tried to kill Midoriya? Midnight asked in disbelief. It could just be a paralytic. But I'm not taking that chance. Nizu answered grimly. Whether it was intended as a prank or something more serious, the fact that someone laced an object with a toxin of some kind and intended for Midoriya to handle that object is beyond worrying. He smoothed down some of his fur. He'd handle this situation swiftly and without mercy. Whoever tried to hurt Midoriya would regret the day they decided to cross Nizu. Nobody hurts my puzzle. Viridian was roof-hopping again. Covering for Shouta wasn't really much different from his own usual patrols, thus far though he slept a lot less. At least Viridian knew the meaning of a day off. Time, how did Shouta do this? He narrowed his gaze as he caught sight of a taped-off area. He silently dropped down near the police, who eyed him suspiciously, not that he could blame them. Sorry, no buddies allowed. Past this point, he stopped him. Viridian's first instinct was to find another way in, before remembering the license. He pulled it out and showed it to the cop. I have a license. The cop inspected it for a moment before staring at him wide-eyed. Sorry. Please, by all means. He lifted the tape so the vigilant hero, he was a hero, now could go in. He didn't like what he saw. There was a dead hero laying in the alleyway. He recognized her as the flower hero, Poppy. She was relatively new to the scene, and a limelight hero. Viridian's brows furrowed as he looked at her body a little closer. There wasn't much sign of a struggle. Sure, she was a long-ranged fighter, but there was a small slice on her arm, and then the stab wound that had killed her. It was made from the front. And something about it tickled the vigilante's mind. Had she been knocked out first? No, her eyes were still open, and there would have been more of a struggle if she had. Her outfit was somewhat dirty, indicating that she'd been patrolling at the time of her death. Likely a relatively quiet patrol. The alleyway had only one entrance, so what had she been doing in there? Viridian hummed to himself, stroking his chin as he looked closer. There were a few drops of blood on the other end of the alleyway, and a mark on the wall that seemed to have been made by a blade of some kind. If there wasn't a struggle, then maybe she'd been knocked out by a quirk, or paralyzed. Paralyzed, paralysis, knives. Stain. He realized. The man had the ability to paralyze his victims, and now that he was thinking about it, he'd only been paralyzed by Stain after he'd drawn blood. That must be it. Either it was his quirk, or he poisoned his blades, but Viridian didn't recall feeling any after effects that'd be associated with poisons or drugs. And many herbal toxins would have been rendered null and void by Poppy, due to the nature of her plant-based quirk. That meant that it was Stain's quirk. He had to draw blood for it to work, then. Naomasa approached him. Any clues, Viridian? Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is Stain's work. The hero killer. That's the one. Remember when he almost killed me? He has this ability to paralyze people. Now I'm pretty sure he has to draw blood to do it, maybe even ingest it. His tongue did have rather large taste buds. So he ingests the blood and the victim is rendered unable to move. He then comes over and kills them at his leisure. I will never get used to how your mind works, nor will I ever stop being amazed. Naomasa shook his head. But if the hero killer is still in Musudafu? No, it doesn't fit his MO. Viridian shook his head. Poppy was a kill of opportunity, not a hunt. Sure, she's not the most selfless hero, but she wasn't bad enough for him to come after, either. Nor was she famous enough. He must have just been passing through and happened upon her during her patrol. She died because of bad timing. Even still, we're implementing the buddy system again. I'll put out the alert. Probably for the best. Viridian sighed. Wait, isn't something with the hero killer coming up soon? He racked his brain, but only the name Hosu popped up. Just a hunch, but have Hosu implement the buddy system, too. Hosu? You sure? Yeah, call it a gut feeling. Naomasa's eyes sharpened. I don't know if you know this, Viridian, but a hero's gut feeling is actually legal reason enough to grant things like a search warrant and whatnot. Saying it's a gut feeling is just about as good as presenting evidence. He smirked. What? He stuttered. I mean, that's great and all, but really. His mind flashed to Tsunaga Mai-san and her soon-to-be dead husband. She was a co-worker of his back in the first run. They worked at the same cafe. They were good friends, having bonded over their mutual quirklessness. Yeah, really. Naomasa went to walk away, but Viridian grabbed his arm. The man raised an eyebrow. It wasn't often that the vigilante initiated physical contact. Do you have someone at your police station named Tsunaga Mai-ran? The detective blinked at the odd question before racking his brain. Yes. I believe he works in the field department. I know his wife, and I've got a bad feeling. Please don't let her husband die. She's quirkless. If he dies, her son will go to the foster care system. The foster care. But if she's able, you don't understand, Masa. Viridian sighed, shoving his hands into his pockets. Quirkless people like us aren't human in the eyes of the law. Sure, for me it meant you couldn't arrest me, but go ahead and look at that law when you get back to the office. Tell me she'd be able to live with her son. The next morning, Viridian would get a message from Naomasa that would comprise of an angry stream of curse words, all directed at the legal system. It'd been nearly 2 weeks since he'd obtained his provisional hero license, and Izuku still couldn't believe that it was real. He'd already used it several times, and he'd given out a few autographs to people, but he never would have thought that he'd ever be licensed. Kigo seemed just as excited as him. The only real damper was when Ectoplasm informed Kigo privately to keep an eye out for Izuku. Of course, as soon as they got home, Kigo told Izuku everything Ectoplasm told him not to. Ah, brothers. Apparently that gift Izuku had found in his locker the other day had been laced with some kind of neurotoxin or something. It wasn't fatal, but it would have taken Izuku out of the sports festival for sure. He was glad he'd listened to his gut when it told him to just turn the whole box into the staff instead of giving into his inner curiosity and looking. Maybe Naomasa was right about Hiro's gut instincts. It was strange to have the staff looking out for him, but it made him feel good. Of course, with this new development, his civilian persona now officially had an open case. Which was not fun. Viridian was part of the team investigating, since, well, he was already watching himself. Kigo had gotten a laugh out of that when he told him. It was tiring, keeping up these two separate personas. At least he could be himself around Kigo. Plus there was the added exhaustion and stress of doing Eraserhead's patrols. The man was an independent hero, which was Izuku's only saving grace. Independent heroes didn't work for agencies. Their pay was entirely reliant upon the criminals they brought in, but they got to work on their own terms. They could accept or reject cases as they pleased without having to explain their reasons to anyone. Though any collateral damage had to be paid out of pocket. Heroes that had signed on to an agency, however, were typically given set schedules, and were on call nearly 24/7. They were paid by the hour, and the money from the villains they caught was added pay on top of their hourly wage. Collateral was typically covered by the agency, and the hero only had to pay a small percentage, kind of like insurance. And that was great and all, having stable guaranteed income, but they had to accept whatever case their agency assigned to them. They didn't really get a choice. And if their agency told them not to attack a certain person or villain for whatever reason, then they had to listen. No matter what. Ultimately, Izuku was grateful that Eraserhead was independent. Not only did he get the pay, he split half with Eraserhead because he was a good person and didn't want to leave his friend without his income, but he wasn't chained to some shitty agency who tried to tell him how to do his job. Viridian had swiftly rejected all agency offers that he'd been extended. He didn't need the money, he just wanted to help people. Although the hours were killer, 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. nearly every day of the week, why did Shouta do this to himself when he could set his own hours? Which meant his only time for sleeping was when he got home after school, around 4. Plus, he still had what would be 3 hours of homework if he hadn't already graduated college and obtained a PhD. Even still, he managed to get maybe 4 hours of sleep at most each night. His teachers were starting to get worried about the growing bags under his eyes, but he brushed it off. Every time they asked about it, he'd just mutter something about nightmares or whatever. Considering the USJ and his supposed trauma, it was perfectly plausible. No wonder Izuku napped throughout class whenever he got the chance. He'd never mock his teacher for carrying a sleeping bag around again. Izuku was damn near at that point, himself. Hound Dog still hadn't been able to get anything substantial out of him, much to the counselor's ire. Not that he showed it, but Izuku could tell these things. He was good at reading people. And he knew that the man was wearing thin. So he gave him a few breadcrumbs the other day. Midoriya, we can't help you if you don't tell us anything. Hound Dog sighed, leveling Izuku with a stare. The boy sat there for a long moment, thinking. He was going to tell Shouta, Nizu and Hisashi, and undoubtedly Tsukachi, soon, right? So what was the harm in letting a little bit slip? There's more than one type of Noma. Hound Dog jolted. This was the first time Izuku had admitted to anyone other than Izawa that he had prior experience with the beasts. He didn't dare interrupt for fear of Izuku clamming up again. I remember the first time I saw a white Noma. He shuddered hard, reaching for a pen and paper on the table beside him. He sketched quietly as he spoke, the action helping keep him grounded a bit. I'd been hiding in an overturned dumpster. There was another guy hiding in the alleyway across from me. I'd quickly realized that this type of Noma was blind, and rightly assumed it had enhanced hearing. His eyes unfocused a bit as the memory flashed before him. It nearly found me. It was so close I could have reached out and touched its snout if I hadn't been petrified with fear. I was sure. I knew I was going to die. He looked Hound Dog in the eye, and the man stiffened. The other guy decided that he was going to run while it was distracted by me, but he moved too soon. It heard him and he flipped the paper over. It was a very detailed image of the white Noma biting the man's head in half. There were no distinguishing features of the man, so Izuku felt comfortable showing it to Hound Dog, who was noticeably paler than before. You saw this? I did. How old were you? Izuku gave a bitter smile. You're never old enough to watch someone die. He seemed to get the hint. Izuku had told him more today than he'd told him in several weeks of counseling. The dog-quirked man knew better than to push the issue here. Izuku knew Hound Dog was good at what he did. He was good at reading people just like Izuku was, and even better at piecing together the smaller details that his clients let slip. The time traveler had little doubt that the man could help him with his trauma if he'd explained everything. But he couldn't explain everything. Not yet. And therein lies the issue. I'm sorry, but is it okay if we leave it at this today? Izuku asked. It's not easy to talk about, even if I look calm. I understand. Thank you for telling me, Midoriya. He smiled and ruffled Izuku's hair. He'd quickly picked up on the fact that Izuku liked positive physical touch. He liked hugs and hair ruffles and things like that, so long as he saw them coming. You're free to go for the day. Helua? Pre-apocalypse to Izuku. Kigo waved a hand in his face, and the boy stumbled back. That's really nice. What if I'd been in a flashback? You have a totally different look when you're in a flashback. This was more like I'm thinking about something really hard, face. You can tell my expressions apart that. Well. Izuku raised an impressed eyebrow. I mean, we have known each other for, I suppose not as long as I thought. I keep thinking it's been years. Me too. Izuku sat back down in his chair properly as he rifled through some papers. His provisional license caught his eye again. It's real. The winged hero spoke up from around the donut in his mouth. You can stop looking at it like it's gonna disappear. I'm sorry. Izuku stared at his provisional license again. It's just surreal. He smiled at his friend and bounced in his seat. Some places are even relaxing their policies on quirkless customers. I was able to go to the store yesterday and they only raised the prices by half. He grinned. They shouldn't be raising the prices at all. Kigo frowned. How often do they do this? Always. Izuku shrugged. It's normal. Usually they'll double the prices, though. So I was happy. Next time you go shopping, take me with you. I'll give them a real reason to raise those prices if they're bold enough to try it with me around. Izuku snorted. Honestly, I'd pay to see that. He paused as a thought occurred to him. I wonder how Shouta or Hisashi would react if they saw someone discriminating. He let an evil grin spread across his face. Well, you'd have to get them to a public location with you, first. Kigo pointed out. If I drop a couple of subtle ideas to Ashido, I'm sure she'll be able to plan a class outing or something. And of course, our ever-protective sensei would want to come to keep us safe and out of trouble. If I mention it offhandedly to present Mike, then he's going to bug his husband until Shouta lets him tag along. Nemuri might even join us if Mike blabs. You planned that out awfully quickly. Kigo shot him a suspicious look. What? It's for a good cause. If UA shows the public that it won't stand for quirkless discrimination, do you have any idea how many more quirkless kids would work harder to get into the school? Even general education would give them an enormous leg up in the workforce. Trust me, I had one hell of a time getting a good job, even with the trade school I went to. He shuddered. I had to go through fucking overhaul to get a decent paying job, and the shit I had to do for him gave me nightmares. Overhaul? As in the Yakuza. Yep. And let me tell you. Izuku's eyes went dark. The shit he's doing right now makes me sick. But we can't intervene just yet. He clenched his fist. Not yet. I'm sorry, Eri. Just a little longer, 'kay? I'm almost done. Oh, 'kay. Kigo looked like he wanted to push the issue, but he'd learned by this point that doing so could shove Izuku into flashbacks. Anyways, what kind of trip would almost definitely give me quirkless backlash? Izuku wondered aloud. It'd have to be a popular place that wouldn't raise suspicions. The zoo. He paused. No, I've never been to the zoo a day in either life. Nobody would recognize me there. Though I'll put that on my to-visit list after saving the world. The mall. He tilted his head. Too vague. And there's no guarantee that they'd even recognize me as the quirkless kid. Something that checks IDs, then. His eyes lit up. The movies. He whirled around to face Kigo. Movie theaters check IDs, right? Why yeah? What, don't tell me you've never been to a movie. Hello? Quirkless? No friends in the first run? Why would I go outside and get sneered at if I didn't have to? Fair enough. Kigo winced. Alright, now for the fun part. Shouta really didn't want to be here. He would honestly rather be just about anywhere else, actually. Fighting a villain, in a cafe, guest starring on his husband's stupid radio show, again, hell he'd rather be doing paperwork. But no. Ashido had the brilliant idea of taking the class out to see a new movie to help calm everyone's nerves for the upcoming sports festival. And the whole damn class had jumped on board with the idea. With the League of Villains out and about, he'd be damned if he let his kids walk around without a pro. That was asking for trouble. Shigaraki made it perfectly clear that he wasn't above targeting the class to get to All Might. The fact that he also singled out Midoriya was cause for even more worry. But kids will be kids, and somehow, Shouta got roped into chaperoning them. And because God hated him, Hisashi somehow found out about the stupid trip and demanded he come along, too. Shouta knew he just wanted an excuse to see the movie in theaters. Shouta wore his hero costume just about everywhere. It didn't matter if he was on the clock or not, it was more practical that way. Plus, it was comfortable, something he'd made sure of when designing it. He knew he'd have a lot of stakeouts as an underground hero, and would oftentimes be stuck in one spot for extended periods of time. As such, he made sure his costume was warm and comfy. It was logical. Hisashi was in his civilian dress, so he wore an old band shirt with ripped-up jeans, his sunglasses, and a biker's jacket. He had his iconic hair down and pulled partially up into a messy bun. The kids hadn't recognized him, and Shouta internally laughed. Midoriya was the one who'd pointed out who he was. Hi Aizawa-sensei. Yamada-sensei. He grinned as Hisashi jolted. You've got a sharp eye, listener. Whoa. Present Mike. Kaminari's eyes were wide. You look so different. That's the purpose of civilian clothing vs hero clothing. I don't always wanna be recognized, yeah no. He grinned. Just call me Yamada for today. Drop the sensei, yeah. The kids started chattering excitedly about the movie they were going to see. Midoriya, however, looked uncomfortable. Shouta watched him with a sharp gaze. Viridian had been keeping him informed of the kids' living situation. He was safe at home, and ate well enough. Hawks often came over to hang out and to make sure he took breaks from his studies. The vigilante Hadn't said anything about abuse, and he'd assured Shouta and Tsukachi that he wasn't living on the streets. Though he had pointed out that it was perfectly possible Midoriya had run away in the past and lived on the streets before UA. It was a solid theory and one Shouta wasn't about to discount. Though sometimes the vigilante was way too specific with his observations. Shouta did not need to know what Midoriya ate for breakfast, or how he liked his eggs sunny side up, thank you very much. He even sent pictures sometimes. Made him wonder if the vigilante had experience stalking people. He had little doubt that the other man was somewhere nearby watching. He glared at a rooftop when he thought he saw a shadow move. Damn it, Viridian. You're laughing at my pain, aren't you? He missed the gleam of mirth in Midoriya's eyes. The kids stepped in line and one by one bought their tickets. Midoriya hesitated, though. Go on, problem child. He encouraged. Had the kid never been to a movie theater before? Sorry, sensei. He muttered as he pulled out his ID. The man at the window looked at Midoriya with mild suspicion, as if he was trying to recognize him. I'll have one ticket to the 5 o'clock showing, please. All right. Price is on the board, please pass your ID. The kid hesitated but obeyed. The man looked at it and his expression changed to a sneer. He all but threw the ID back at the kid. Sorry, we don't sell tickets to your kind. What? Please? I have the money. What's going on over here? Shouta asked, walking over. Midoriya shook a little as a manager came out of the building. Hisashi was standing next to Shouta and the other students looked on in confusion. The manager, a woman with short black hair and tiny red horns, stalked over with an angry scowl on her face. Before Hisashi or Shouta could do anything, she walked right up to Midoriya and backhanded him so hard that he fell to the ground, before pouring a soda over his head. Every person froze in shock, Shouta included. That did not just happen. Quirkless filth. We don't serve your kind here. The moment the words left her mouth, the bystanders who'd gathered in curiosity or concern continued on like it was normal. Like this was something to be expected. Shouta felt sick. Someone even laughed and snapped a photo. Shouta then stepped between the woman and his student, bodily shoving her back with a tad bit more force than necessary. You know it's quirkless, right? I told it if it ever came back, I'd send it packing. She hissed. Shouta was beyond pissed. He had heard horror stories of how quirkless people were treated, but said people were so uncommon and such introverts because of their treatment that he'd never seen this kind of thing in person. Until now. He was appalled. With treatment like this, it was no wonder Viridian looked at their kindness with wary eyes and kept them at arm's length. It was no wonder Midoriya looked at the bullying like it was to be expected. The bullying was likely tame in comparison to some of the shit he'd gone through if this was how he was treated for trying to see a goddamned movie. The thought suddenly occurred that Viridian might not notice some of this treatment as wrong, considering he was quirkless, too. He could be just as used to it as Midoriya, meaning he wouldn't report it to himself or Tsukachi. They'd need to rectify that later. Shouta reached into his pocket as calmly as he could and pulled out his hero license. The woman stiffened a little. This is Midoriya. He is my student. If you say or do one more thing that hurts or belittles him in any way, I will hurt you. This is your verbal warning. If you proceed to provoke him or me, I can and will arrest you. He growled. Unfortunately, it looked like the woman was more intelligent than he'd given her credit for, because she backed down. He wished he could do more than fine her for quirk discrimination, but legalities state that he had to give a verbal warning first. She backed down, so he couldn't legally beat her to a pulp. Though if he was being honest, if his students weren't watching, he'd say fuck legalities and kick her ass anyways. Hisashi would bail him out of jail. Fine. You will give my students refunds for their tickets, and Midoriya an apology. I have no obligation to do either. She glared back, but he saw the shine of fear in her eyes. No, no you don't. He let a bloodthirsty grin stretch across his face. But technically you attacked a hero in training in front of his teacher. Under the law, I can treat you like a villain. And damn do I want to. Shouta felt Hisashi's hand on his arm, and that was the only thing that kept him from springing forward and knocking this bitch's teeth out. The woman paled. TCH fine, take your money back. We don't want your service anyways. She huffed. He let his eyes flash red, and she flinched. Apologize. He growled out through clenched teeth. Hisashi's grip would probably bruise later, but he was far too angry to care. Sensei, it's fine. Midoriya, it's not fine. What she did was far out of line. Shouta argued. He thought he heard a small whisper of, I'm used to it, but he couldn't be sure. Fine. She looked at Midoriya with the most disgusted expression she could muster. I humbly apologize for my actions and words, she said with a stiff, shallow bow. Happy. She turned back to Shouta for a moment before retreating inside. Oh, how Shouta wanted to beat her black and blue for what she'd done to his student. But he couldn't do that in broad daylight with so many witnesses around. Another reason to hate daylight. Midoriya, are you okay? He turned his full attention to his student, who looked at him with wide eyes. There was a darkening bruise on his cheek where she'd hit him, and a small cut from one of her many rings. He was shivering a bit. It was a tad chilly out and he was covered in soda. Hisashi's jacket was draped over Midoriya's shoulders, and the kid clung to the edges. For warmth. Come on, let's get you cleaned up. Midoriya. Uraraka asked, the first of the students to speak up. What was that? That's so wrong. How could anyone do something so unmanly? Kirishima growled. Even Bakugo looked mildly surprised. Guys, it's fine. Don't worry about it. People don't look at quirkless people the same, yeah no. He gave them a smile. And though it wasn't a bright grin, it looked far too real. I'll be fine. Just a little sticky. You should go enjoy the movie, and let me know how it is. TCH. Bakugo glared at Midoriya. If you really fucking think that we're going to waste our time at a shitty place like this that treats people like that, then you really are a fucking idiot. Midoriya looked completely taken aback. Bakugo. The blonde flinched a little at the name. It's not right. She didn't even treat you like a goddamned human. I mean, that's normal. Izuku tilted his head like he was honestly confused. There are just some places I can't go. Stores up the prices for me all the time when they recognize me, and I've even had heroes. He quickly shut up and Shouta had a very bad feeling. He'd come back to that later. With Hisashi. And probably some other people who could keep Shouta calm because he really didn't want to go to jail for manslaughter. Hisashi didn't have enough money to bail him out from that. Mike, you stay with the kids, I'm going to get Midoriya cleaned up. Alright. You don't finish that sentence, problem child, and I'll give everyone a pop quiz on Monday. He mentally sighed in relief when the kid shut his mouth again. He led him over to the gym across the street. They were affiliated with heroes, and let them in with no questions once Shouta flashed his license. He allowed Midoriya to wash up in the shower as he rinsed the boys' clothes in the sink and used the spin dryer to get them as dry as possible. They were still mildly damp, but it'd have to do. Hisashi's jacket would keep the kid warm, at least. He stepped out of the room as his problem child changed back into his clothes. I'm sorry. He apologized. Shouta sighed. What are you apologizing for, Midoriya? You're going out of your way for me. He flushed red and looked away. Look. What happened may be normal for you, but that doesn't make it any less wrong. You are my student. And I will stand by you. I'll protect you. Midoriya looked up at him with a plethora of emotions swirling in his eyes. Shouta couldn't even begin to name them all. Thank you, he said as the tears started to fall. He wrapped his student in a hug as he cried. For the briefest of moments, his mind went to Viridian, crying in Tsukachi's office after obtaining his provisional license. He wondered if Midoriya would be just as emotional when he obtained his. Midoriya pulled away after a little bit and they started walking out of the gym. You mentioned something about heroes earlier. The kid stiffened. Would you rather talk about it later? Please. I need you to let me know if something like this happens again. Record it on your phone. Text me. I don't care. It's wrong, and technically illegal. Though the most we can do for most of that stuff is fining. If a hero discriminates, they can lose their license. ERM. Yeah. Was it a teacher at U.A? He needed to know. No. Time, no. No, it wasn't a UA hero. I promise. Shouta briefly wondered about the odd phrasing. Time. As opposed to God? He brushed it off, though. There were far too many religions out there to pay attention to, and whatever this kid believed in, it wasn't any of Shouta's business. All right, then. I'll let it drop for now. Thank you, sensei. We're not in school right now, problem child. It's just Aizawa. He ruffled the boy's hair without thinking about it. Hound Dog said the kid liked physical contact. That he thrived off it. And while the boy stiffened for a moment, he melted into the touch not long after. Aizawa se Aizawa. He corrected himself. They could see the rest of the class up ahead. Shouta turned his gaze lazily towards his student, though he was keeping a sharp eye on the people around them. Now that he was looking for it, he noticed the way passers-by would glare at Midoriya. Word must have gotten out about him being quirkless from the commotion earlier, then. The way people kept a distance from him like he was contagious, he doubted most of the crowd even knew why they distanced themselves around a kid, but one person did it, so the crowd would follow. Shouta found it simultaneously ridiculous and heartbreaking. The kid looked so used to it. He'd have to inform Hound Dog and the rest of the staff later. I wanted to thank you. Nobody's ever stood up for me like that before. I won't forget it. He sent Shouta a grin before he ran off to rejoin the class like nothing happened.